Hello and welcome back to another video. In this tutorial I'll be sharing how to make a basic shoulder dart. So if this is something you're interested in learning or knowing how to make, you definitely want to keep on watching up to the end of this video. Now the shoulder dart is often seen in jackets, blazers and some dresses, so you definitely want to keep up and see how this can be achieved. To begin, I took a border line at the top of my paper there from where all my measurements would be taken. Next up, I'm just going to mark half of my shoulder width, which is 8 inches, and mark the 8-inch point on that border line at the top. Next, from that border line as well, I'll be taking my vertical body points, which are my shoulder to bust points, my shoulder to under bust, my shoulder to waist, and my shoulder to the length of the garment or the length of the top that we'll be making. So my shoulder to bust is 10, shoulder to under bust is 14, then waist 16, then the length is 21. Next, I'm going to square out all those points using my ruler, and I'll be drawing horizontal lines from end to end of my pattern paper. So I'm just going to go ahead and label all those lines so I don't get confused as to what is what. So that is the bust line, this is the under bust line that we have here. Then the next line is my waist line. Then the last line would be the length of the garment. So I'm going to go ahead and label all those lines just so we all know what lines are where. So that is the length. So what I'll be doing next is to take my upper chest line, basically the same way I took the body line. So this would help when creating the armhole. So my upper chest line is 8 inches from my shoulder, so I'm just going to mark 8 inches and then square out the line the same way I took the other body point. So I'm just going to connect those points together end to end using my ruler and making a straight line. Next up, I'll be connecting that shoulder point to the upper chest line. Remember, I took half of my shoulder measurement along that border line at the top, so I'm going to connect those points to the upper chest line, and that's where my armhole would form. So what I'll be doing next is to take half of my bust span measurement. So my bust span measurement is 8 inches, so that divided by 2 is 4 inches. So I'm going to mark 4 inches on my upper chest line, my bust line, my under bust line, all the way down to the length. So I'm just marking 4 inches across all those lines from top to bottom. So you want to ensure that you do it and it's even, and just so your dart doesn't tilt or shift or looks a certain kind of way. So I'm going to mark 4 inches from top to bottom. Next, I'll be connecting all those points together using my ruler, like I've been doing, connecting all those lines together, and that will be my dart line. So I'm just going to draw from top all the way down. Now to contour the dart, I'll be going inwards along that under bust line by 2 inches. So I'm just going to place my tape on that dart line that we just drew and measure 2 inches inwards along the under bust line. So I'm just going to mark 2 inches, and I'm going to repeat the same thing on the waistline. I'm going to mark 2 inches as well, ensuring that the edge of the tape is placed right on that line. Then for the length, I'm not going to use 2 inches. I'm going to use 1.5 inches because you don't want the length to be too snug or too tight. Hence why I am using 1.5 inch along that length line. So for the under bust and the waist, I use 2 inches respectively. Then for the length, I use 1.5 inches, as you can see. Next, I'm going to go to the bust point along that line. Then what I'm going to do is go below my bust line along that line by 1 inch, and go above my bust point by along that line by 1 inch as well. Now what this does, it avoids pointiness or sharpness along that bust curve. So I'm just going to connect all those points together, starting from the contour along the under bust line, and then connect it to the waist, and then connect it to the length using my ruler. You could use a French curve if you do have, but I'm using a ruler for this. Then I'm going to connect that 1 inch point that goes below the bust line to that line that goes to the under bust line, like this. Then I'm going to create my neckline. Next, I'll be creating the neckline. To do this, I'm going to measure a neckline that is 3 inches inwards. So I'm going to mark 3 inches along that borderline at the top, and I'm going to make the neckline 6 inches deep. So I'm going to measure it 6 inches deep and mark the 6-inch point. So do note that the neckline, there's no particular style of neckline for this, so you can do whatever you want or whatever suits your preference, but I just want a neckline that is kind of wide towards the bust area and narrows down as it goes upwards, more like a halter neck kind of vibe. So that's what I want for the neckline. So I want a neckline that is 3 inches wide at the top along the shoulder, then 4 inches wide at the depth point. So yeah, so I'm just going to connect all those points together to form the neckline. So when I draw this out, you're going to see that the top is kind of smaller than the base, because I want the base of the neckline to be slightly wider than the shoulder part of the neckline. Then I'm just going to curve this out to properly form my neckline. Once that is done, I'm going to measure whatever is left of my shoulder, then divide that by 2. And an easy way to do this is just to measure the shoulder in the entire shoulder, then fold the measuring tape into 2, then mark the midpoint where the tape folds. So I'm just going to do that and mark the midpoint, then connect the midpoint of the shoulder to that 1 inch line above my bust line using a straight line. Then I'm going. So from that line I just drew from the shoulder, I'm going to go outwards by 1 inch. So I'm going to come out along that shoulder line by 1 inch as well, towards the outer part of the shoulder, not the inner part of the shoulder. I'm going to mark 1 inch on the outer part of that line along the shoulder line, and then I would connect it to that 1 inch point above the bust line, like I did for the first line I drew from shoulder to that point. So this would form the shoulder dart that would be for the shoulder basically. Then since I removed 1 inch from the dart, or from the shoulder rather, I'm going to replace it by adding 1 inch, or extending the actual shoulder by 1 inch. So I'm just going to extend the original shoulder by 1 inch and then connect it to my upper chest line from the shoulder to that upper chest line with a straight line. I'm saying lines a lot. Wow. So this first shoulder line I drew, we will not be working with that, rather we'll be working with the new shoulder line that was just drawn. Next up, I'm going to be taking a quarter of my body measurements. Now, do note that when I take my body measurements or a quarter of my body measurements, I would ensure to replace the 2 inches I took for the dart along the bust line, and I'm going to replace the 2 inches I took for the dart along the underbust and the waistline. Then I'm going to replace the 1.5 inch I took along that length. So whatever a quarter of your body circumference is, you want to ensure that you add 2 inches to whatever measurement that is from the bust, the waist and under bust. Then add seam allowance and ease as well. So what I'm doing next is to slant my shoulder by 1 inch from that outer dart line, not the inner dart line now. So I'm going to slant it by 1 inch, then now create the armhole curve. So this is what my front plan is looking like. I'm going to go ahead and label this side front, which I'll be cutting 2 off, and the center front as well. So depending on what you want, you can cut the center front on fold. You can also cut 2 of center front pieces. So what I'm going to do next is to cut out all these pieces that we just created. If you're still watching up to this very moment and you haven't subscribed, kindly click on the subscribe button. It is absolutely free. And if you've enjoyed this video so far, do leave a thumbs up because this helps my channel grow. And if there's anything you would like to say so far, or any questions you would like to ask, kindly leave a comment in the comment section and I'll respond to it as soon as I can. So this is what our front plan is looking like. Next, we'll be making the back plan for this project. Similar to what we did on the front plan, I took all my body points and I made room for zipper allowance along that center back edge of the paper. Then from that end of center back, I'm going to measure half of my shoulder width, which is 8 inches, and connect it to the upper chest line with a straight line. Next up, I'm going to create my neckline first. So the neckline is 3 inches wide and 1.5 inch deep. So I like using 1.5 as opposed to 1 inch for the depth of my back neckline. I just find this a lot easier. So I'm just going to connect those points together to make a neckline for the back. Then from that zipper allowance, I took 4 inches to make the dart, basically the same way I did for the front. So I'm just going to connect all the 4-inch points together to make the dart for the back. Then I'm going to go above that bust point by 1 inch. I won't be going below the bust line because we do not have to do too much contouring for the back. So I'm just going to go above the bust line by 1 inch. Then I'm going to move over to the shoulder and measure the midpoint of the shoulder, basically the same way I did for the front. Measure the full length of whatever is left of the shoulder, fold my tape into 2 to get the midpoint, and mark the midpoint of the shoulder. So I find folding the tape really easy as opposed to calculating that all from scratch. So I'm just going to mark the midpoint and connect it to the 1 inch point that is above the bust line. So the reason I'm not contouring the back is because the back is really flat as opposed to the front that has the bust and everything. So yes, so this is what the plan looks like currently. Next up, I'm going to go outwards along that shoulder line by 1 inch as well, the same way I did for the front. Then I've connected to that 1 inch point above the bust line. So next, I'll be replacing the 1 inch that was taken from the shoulder, or the 1 inch we just took from the shoulder. So I'm going to extend that shoulder width by 1 inch since we took away 1 inch to create the dart. So that would be the new armhole line or guide for the armhole. So this first line, we will not be making use of it. Then I am just going to go below that borderline by 1 inch to slant the shoulder by 1 inch. So do know that the slant I'll be connecting to that outer dart line, not the inner dart line. So I'm going to connect it like so. Then I'm going to go ahead and take a quarter of my body measurements, ensuring that I replaced any measurements for the dart. And to do this, I'm doing it from the zipper allowance line. So what I'm doing is basically using the same measurements I used for the front, just so everything is even and equal. Because the front would have more allowance than the back, I do not want that. So I'm going to use the same thing I used for the front for the back measurement in terms of body size and measurement. Once that is done, the next step would be to create the armhole. So I'm just going to go ahead and carve out the armhole for the back plan. Then I'm just going to go ahead and cut out all the pieces, starting with the dart. I am going to cut out all the pieces. Now you want to take your time to do this so you don't cut in too much or cut out more than you should. So I'm just going to cut out all the pieces from top to bottom, ensuring that I take note of what lines I should be cutting. So you actually want to take out time to figure out what lines you should be cutting and understand, so you don't cut out the wrong lines. So this is what the back plan is looking like once it has been cut, and this is what all the panels look like when they have been placed side by side. Do let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section. If you have any video you want me to get to or any questions, you can leave a comment and I'll get to it as soon as I can. Then leave a huge thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Let's all go together. I'll see you guys in another video. Bye.